What if everything you thought you knew about them? Was it a lie? Chosen one, something is stirring. Whispers are spreading. Eyes are watching. And somewhere in the shadows, a truth is pressing against the walls. Desperate to break free. You can feel it, can't you? That tension in the air, the kind that comes right before a storm no one is ready for. This is bigger than rumors, bigger than coincidence. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Before we go any further, I want you to drop 777 the comments if your spirit has ever felt that holy warning before the world knew why. And to every single one of you who's kept this channel alive, whether through super thanks or simply by showing up, you have my deepest gratitude. Stay close, because in just a moment, you'll understand why some people are praying you never find out what I'm about to tell you. God's chosen ones. Their biggest secret is out and you hold the proof. They mistook your sensitivity for stupidity. They believed your gentleness was naivety, as if kindness was a weakness and compassion was a blindfold. They saw you listen more than you spoke and assumed your silence meant ignorance. What they never discerned was that your spirit, sharpened like a watchman on the city wall, was reading the blueprint of their intentions in real time. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. You embodied this without saying a word. They mistook your patience for passivity, not realizing you were mapping out their every move like an architect tracing the hidden corridors of a fortress. While they performed, whispered, and schemed in the shadows, you detected patterns, subtle shifts in tone, the cracks in their stories, the counterfeit warmth in their smiles. Like David facing Goliath, you measured the enemy not by their size, but by the weakness in their stance. For nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed. Luke 8:17. And still, you didn't rush. You weren't in a race to win petty arguments. You were in a war to dismantle deception itself. Why waste arrows on shadows when the fortress can fall in one strike? In the world beyond Scripture, the words of Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space, your silence was your power. While they thought they had you in their grip, you were taking the measure of their soul. And like a hawk circling high above, you waited for the exact moment when their own arrogance would leave them exposed. Isn't it true that predators always underestimate the stillness of their prey? History bears witness to this pattern. During the reign of Emperor Nero, his cruelty was masked by theatrical charm, drawing crowds with spectacles while quietly silencing dissenters. But what history often forgets is how his own confidants, people he thought loyal, observed him long enough to collect evidence of his tyranny. When the truth surfaced, it was not with a bloody uprising, but with surgical precision, dismantling the facade he had built. The wicked are ensnared by the work of their hands. Psalm 9:16. You operated the same way. You didn't shout. You didn't threaten. You didn't even warn them. You let them walk deeper into the snare they set for you, knowing that premature confrontation would only invite manipulation and denial. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn. Psalm 37:6. You smiled in their presence, nodded at their lies, all while the evidence stacked up like bricks in a wall they could never climb over. The moment came, and when it did, you didn't just tear one thread from their web, you tore down the entire network of deceit they had so carefully woven. And here is the part they will never admit. It wasn't rage that undid them. It was the calm precision of your revelation, the kind of truth that needs no dramatics. The very softness they once mocked became the scalpel that cut their schemes apart. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, Isaiah 54:17. When a chosen one finally speaks, the matter is already sealed in heaven and executed on earth. Now, they're not just embarrassed, they are unsettled. Because if you saw this, they're wondering what else you know. What other secrets are you still holding? And isn't it terrifying for them to realize that the game they thought they controlled was always played on your terms? This is the moment to rise, to step into the authority God placed on you from the beginning. Stand tall. Chosen one for your discernment has already written the ending to their story. And it is not the ending they planned. You let them finish the setup. Not out of ignorance, but out of deliberate awareness. Like the tide that patiently waits for the moon to pull it higher before crashing onto the shore. You allowed their plan to swell until it could no longer be hidden, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Matthew 10:26. Step by step. You watched the blueprint of their deception unfold, each move more revealing than the last. Why interrupt the performance when the climax would expose them entirely? They believed you were blind, a passive audience to their act. Yet your spirit was the director, quietly controlling the lighting. You let them think they were luring you in, but in truth, you were letting them drop their mask completely. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Like a spider weaving an elaborate web in a storm, they worked tirelessly on a trap they believed would hold you. But even in nature, the web is powerless if the prey knows its threads, and you knew every strand before they finished. You saw the coordination, the fake concern in their eyes, the forced generosity timed too perfectly, the sudden interest in your life that reeked of performance. You detected the mismatch between the energy of their words and the stiffness of their body language, and rather than cut them off, you let the current flow. Why would a seasoned sailor destroy the wind when it's already steering the enemy's ship toward the rocks? Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. Proverbs 26:27. You allowed the rope to stretch until they entangled themselves so deeply that no escape was possible. In the theater of their deception, you refused to interrupt the movie. You let the full plot develop because you understood exposure requires completion. A half-built bridge doesn't collapse under its own weight, but a finished one will crumble if its foundations are corrupt. It's the same in nature. A fruit rotting on the branch will eventually drop of its own accord, and when it fell, there was no denying what it was. Their hands were stained, and no river could wash them clean. It reminds me of a moment in Les Miserables, where Inspector Javert, obsessed with catching Valjean, tightens the net so completely that it ultimately ensnares his own conscience. Your enemies made the same error. While they were setting the stage for your downfall, the spotlight shifted and illuminated them instead. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. And isn't it strange how the same hands that built your cage can also forge their own chains? You didn't stumble into the trap. You let them build it around their own feet. And when it collapsed, you were already walking away. They were left standing in the rubble, choking on the dust of their own plans. No pleading from you. No frantic explanations, just the unshakable clarity of a soul that knows its worth. Evidence remains evidence they cannot delete. Guilt they cannot explain. And a story they can no longer control. After all, what happens when the truth you tried to bury becomes the very seed that grows into your public reckoning? This is the moment. chosen one. Rise in the strength of your discernment. Rise in the authority heaven placed upon you. No weapon forged against you will prevail. Isaiah 54:17. You are not the one trapped. You are the one walking free while they remain in chains of their own making. Stand tall. The war is already won. The trap they built was custom engineered for a version of you that no longer exists. Like an architect designing a structure based on outdated blueprints, they tailored every detail to the contours of your old self, the self that craved love so desperately you tolerated disrespect, the self that stayed silent, not because you agreed, but because you feared the storms that speaking the truth might bring, the self that overlooked red flags simply to avoid the ache of starting over. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. 1 Corinthians 13:11. But can a building stand when its foundation has already been replaced? Here's what they didn't know. You outgrew that version without broadcasting the change. While they studied a fossilized image of who you were evolving quietly, steadily, with the precision of a master sculptor shaping marble in a locked studio. The very pain they inflicted became the forge that refined your discernment. Like a mathematician solving a once impossible equation, you learned the patterns of manipulation and could now identify them within seconds. Did they really think you'd step into the same trap twice? They armed themselves with old data, but your operating system had already been upgraded. Your boundaries became the load-bearing walls of an unshakable fortress. Your faith became the resonance frequency that shattered their false narratives before they could take root. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. They didn't realize you were no longer a structure that could be destabilized by subtle emotional earthquakes. You were reinforced with truth, welded together by prayer, and anchored in the unchanging foundation of God's Word. They thought they could bait you with the same recycled tactics, false promises, guilt trips, counterfeit loyalty, and the poisonous thread of trauma bonding, like engineers reusing a failed prototype. They believed that if they reintroduced the same emotional triggers, you'd shrink back into the mold they once controlled. But you refused. Fear of man will prove to be a snare. But whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Proverbs 29:25. You chose growth over nostalgia, even when it meant walking away from those you once thought you couldn't live without. Wasn't the pain of the past lesson enough to make you walk differently now? Psychologically, it's the equivalent of changing the lock while they still hold the old key they approach. Confident they'd walk right in, only to find the door no longer responds to their touch. And as Nobel Prize-winning physicist Niels Bohr once said, an expert is a man who has made all the mistakes which can be made in a narrow field. You became the expert in avoiding their traps because you had already fallen into enough of them to master the escape. When you didn't react with the volatility they anticipated, it shattered the mechanics of their plan. They were prepared for an emotional hurricane, but got the stillness of a fortified citadel instead. They expected to see the ghost of your former self, the over-forgiving, over-apologizing version that would take the blame just to keep the peace. But ghosts cannot be manipulated. And you are not a ghost. And that's why their design failed. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. Psalm 18:2. They set the trap for a shadow, but you showed up as a completely new creation. One they couldn't read, predict, or bend. Now they sit in the rubble of their own calculations, staring at a blueprint that has no relevance to the reality standing before them. They're not just angry, they're bewildered, because in their hearts, They know the truth. God's hand on your life recalibrated your entire foundation, making their setup powerless against the strength you built in the dark. And isn't it poetic justice that the very snare they built for you became their own prison? So, rise. Chosen one. Stand in that strength. Walk forward without fear. For the snares of yesterday are no match for the fortress you've become today. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. They weaponized what they knew about you, but you conquered them with what they ignored. They gathered fragments of your past like shrapnel, loading each memory into the chamber of their schemes, the childhood wounds that once made you hesitate, the insecurities you carried in silence, the moments you trusted too quickly, the mistakes made before wisdom had time to take root. They believed that if they pressed those same scars, you would bleed the same way you once did. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. But what happens when the wound they target has already been healed? They counted on your predictable pain response. They dragged up your family history, the dysfunction, the abandonment, the cold silences that once broke you down. They thought mirroring those patterns would send you back into numbness, back into the fog. They studied your emotional reflexes, your attachment style, your fears, and they built a trap around the parts of you that used to collapse under pressure. But while they were fixated on who you used to be, you were quietly rewriting the blueprint of your soul. The old has gone. The new is here. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Real-life wisdom echoes this truth. The late Maya Angelou, a poet and force of resilience, once said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." That's what you lived out. They expected the version of you that begged for closure. You became the one who no longer needed their apology to move forward. They assumed you still required their validation. But they never noticed the sanctuary you built with God, a foundation unseen, yet immovable. History itself gives us a sobering villain's tale. In the court of Pharaoh, his magicians sought to replicate Moses' miracles, thinking they understood the source of his power. But when the plagues escalated beyond their control, they faced consequences they could neither reverse nor explain. Exodus 8:18-19. Your enemies made the same miscalculation. They thought they were matching your moves. They didn't realize they were operating in an entirely different dimension, one they had no authority in. You stopped running in circles and started walking on purpose. That shift was invisible to them because they only observed your actions, never your spirit. You flipped the entire strategy with what they never studied: your discernment, your ability to read the current beneath the conversation, your refusal to argue just to be right. Now, you listen with your soul, not merely your ears. Can someone control a current they cannot even see? They prepared for a fight. You brought stillness. They tried to stir chaos. You answered with the kind of silence that unsettles those who thrive on control. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. They aimed to use familiarity as a weapon, but they struck at air because you had outgrown the battleground. The power wasn't in a loud retaliation, it was in the calm resonance of alignment. And isn't that what truly terrifies the ones who thought they knew you best? Their downfall was not your rage, it was your refusal to engage on their terms. They underestimated everything they didn't bother to learn, and that is why the weapon was formed. But it never prospered. You didn't just survive their strategy, you rewrote the script they thought you'd follow. He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Psalm 23:5. Rise. Chosen one. The same God who reshaped you in private has just proven in public that no past version of you can be used to destroy the present you. Stand tall, because the victory is already yours. You didn't just outsmart them, you exposed the shadowed hands that pulled their strings, while they were busy baiting you with emotional traps. You were mapping the unseen architecture of the attack, tracing every thread of manipulation back to its source. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Ephesians 6:12. What if the person standing in front of you was never the true opponent? The patterns were too deliberate, like the synchronized migration of starlings in murmurations, thousands moving as one, guided by an invisible signal. The timing was too exact, like ocean tides, obeying the unseen pull of the moon. Certain conversations repeated with eerie precision. Certain people appeared at pivotal moments with identical empty words, like actors reading the same worn-out script, and you began to recognize them for what they were, not merely individuals making choices, but vessels carrying orders they didn't even comprehend. Instead of being swept up in the raw sting of betrayal, you shifted your focus. You stopped staring at the wound and began examining the arrowhead who forged it, who aimed it, and why. Be sober. Be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter 5-8. You discerned that some of these people were spiritually hijacked. Their actions, the byproduct of witchcraft, generational strongholds, soul ties, or ancient debts in your bloodline. Isn't it chilling to realize someone's attack on you may have begun generations before you were born? Nature has its own reflection of this truth, the parasitic wasp that injects its will into another creature, compelling it to act against its own instincts. A chilling, living metaphor of how dark forces can commandeer a human life. These people were pawns. Yes, but pawns placed with surgical precision by a strategist who knew your history, and yet, like a seasoned falcon watching from the cliffs, you waited, calm and still, until the right moment to strike back. It was in that stillness that the masks began to slip. You saw the handlers, not human faces, but spirits of envy, sabotage, and relentless monitoring. The air around certain moments felt weighted, as if heaven itself was pausing to let you notice the fingerprints on the scene. And in that moment, the entire plot felt less like life and more like theatre, echoing the words from Shakespeare's Hamlet, "Though this be madness, yet there is method in't." There was a method indeed, but it wasn't theirs anymore. You stopped playing defense. You stopped trying to rehabilitate people who were never meant to be your responsibility. Submit yourselves, then, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. James 4-7. Your prayers turned from vague petitions into strategic strikes. You declared truth with fire. You walked away without guilt, like a captain steering clear of a reef revealed by low tide. And when you did, something broke. You didn't just dodge manipulation, you dismantled the entire network that powered it. You saw the puppeteer, you saw the theater lights flicker, the stagehands scatter, the marionettes collapse without guidance. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1-5. Now, they aren't merely angry that you didn't fall. They are terrified that you saw. Because once the puppeteer is exposed, the show is over. And you didn't just glimpse it. You saw everything. Rise, chosen one. You've shifted from being a piece on the board to being the one who reads the board. Walk forward, knowing the game is already won. For the victory was written before the battle began. They built the perfect performance, but you had the script long before opening night. Every word they spoke was rehearsed with the precision of an actor perfecting lines under the unforgiving glow of stage lights. Every action was timed like cues in a symphony. Every expression, a deliberate signal meant to evoke a specific reaction from their audience. To the casual observer, they seemed flawless, playing the victim in one scene, the hero in another, the loyal friend in the next, as if they were born for the role. But the Lord does nothing without revealing his secret to his servants, the prophets. Amos 3-7. You already knew the ending before the curtain even rose, because heaven doesn't let its chosen ones walk into ambushes blind. The plot they crafted was intricate. Yes, but it was written in ink that fades in the light of truth. The Holy Spirit had given you advance notice in the language heaven uses, not in letters or ink, but in sudden atmospheric shifts in your spirit, in dreams heavy with meaning, in moments of resonance that vibrated in your chest like a tuning fork struck by an unseen hand. These weren't coincidences, they were divine alerts, each one sharpening your discernment. Psychology calls it pattern recognition. Scripture calls it discernment. And isn't it strange how the soul can hear the footsteps of betrayal long before they reach the door? Like a deer sensing the shift in wind before a predator appears, even before the curtain lifted, you could feel the spiritual lighting cues dim and change, signaling the act that was about to unfold. You weren't surprised when the dialogue shifted into lies, or when they twisted your words like architects bending blueprints to hide a crack in the foundation. You had seen the design flaws in their structure long before they believed you could. You weren't shocked when certain people suddenly turned cold. The script had already been read to you in silence, page by page. And like a master chess player who can see 10 moves ahead, you didn't waste energy stopping them mid-game. You let the pieces move exactly where they wanted, because you knew God was moving in ways they couldn't calculate. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Sometimes stillness isn't weakness. It's the kind of confidence that terrifies an opponent who thrives on chaos. Instead of confronting them prematurely, you gave them the stage, and more importantly, the rope to hang their own narrative. They planted props like false evidence, manipulated text messages, and carefully staged conversations with the precision of a set designer hiding flaws behind painted backdrops. But in physics, false structures collapse under their own flawed load distribution. And their play was no different. Truth operates on its own clock. And clocks don't lie. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. Luke 8:17. It's the same way a tree with hollow roots eventually falls, no matter how lush its leaves appear. They didn't realize that the very spotlight they craved was also the heat lamp that would make their painted smiles crack. This brings to mind a story from Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, who once said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." You understood this principle in the spiritual realm. You knew that, to connect the dots clearly, you had to let the whole picture form without interrupting the process. Stopping the performance halfway would only blur the lines, making the truth look like another act in their play. The longer you let them perform, the more obvious it became who was playing a role and who was living in truth. And that clarity was worth the wait. Even if the waiting tested every fiber of patience within you. And so, you detached. While they thought they were captivating you with their act, you were emotionally clocked out, like an audience member who already knows the twist ending and is just waiting for the credits to roll. You didn't belong on their stage, because God never wrote you into their script. You were just a witness, not a participant. standing in the wings as the drama unraveled itself. The irony? They mistook your stillness for ignorance, not realizing it was the kind of knowing that can only come from walking hand in hand with the author of life. When the final act came, you didn't clap, you didn't cry, you didn't offer the standing ovation they thought they'd earned. You simply walked away, leaving them with their props, their rehearsed lines, and the hollow echo of their own applause. He makes all things beautiful in its time, Ecclesiastes 3:11, and this was your time to exit. It was the moment heaven whispered, "You don't need to win this scene, because you've already won the story." And there's a special kind of power in knowing when to close the door and let the curtain fall without a single word. And here's the part they'll never understand. Your silence wasn't the absence of power. It was the presence of mastery. You chose not to audition for a role in a story. The author of life never penned for you. And once you see the script from the throne room's perspective, you never again settle for the cheap theater of human manipulation. You've learned that real authority doesn't need applause. It carries the quiet weight of eternity, and in that quiet, you've already moved on to the next chapter. God himself is writing for you. You let the snake slither closer, not to befriend it, but to make sure that when the strike came, its head would never rise again. You sensed the shift instantly. The tone in conversations began to warp. The air between words thickened. The kind of silence that speaks louder than shouting crept in. The prudent see danger and take refuge. Proverbs 27:12. This wasn't paranoia. This was the spiritual radar God built into you. The kind that alerts you before the storm even shows on the horizon. And the moment you felt that shift, you knew this wasn't a time for panic, it was a time for precision. But instead of lunging at the first sign of danger, you did something they didn't anticipate. You stayed still. You let them come closer. You allowed them to believe they were winning, that they had you wrapped tight in their coils. They mistook your stillness for fear, your quietness for surrender. But you were simply studying the map of their moves, every lie, every alliance, every backdoor conversation. You tracked it all. With the precision of a hunter who knows the prey will eventually walk into the perfect clearing. Could they really imagine you hadn't noticed the pattern long before they finished weaving it? Every moment they thought you were frozen, you were actually sharpening the blade. There's a lesson here echoed by military strategist Sun Tzu, who said, "If you wait by the river long enough, the bodies of your enemies will float by." You understood this. You didn't need to be the first to act. You needed to be the one who acted at the right moment. Why swing wildly when a single, well-timed blow could dismantle everything? Patience wasn't your weakness, it was your weapon. And you wielded it until the exact second the advantage was yours. History gives us a chilling villain's tale that proves this truth. In the ancient court of Babylon, Haman plotted for months to destroy Mordecai and the Jewish people. Esther 3. He built gallows for his enemy, convinced his timing was perfect. But when the moment of exposure came, it flipped in an instant, and Haman was hung on the very gallows he had prepared. You recognized the same pattern in your own battle. The one who schemes is often caught in the snare of their own design. And like Haman, your enemies never considered that the weapon they built for you would end up being the monument of their own downfall. So you waited. And when the pattern became undeniable, when the evidence was so clear that even their most loyal allies couldn't ignore it, you moved, not with rage, but with revelation. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Mark 4:22. You acted with surgical precision, cutting the root instead of swatting at leaves. The move was swift, and it collapsed everything they had been secretly building. Isn't it true that when light finally touches darkness, it has no choice but to flee? And when it fled this time, it didn't just expose their actions, it revealed the spirit behind them. Now they're left in chaos, confused, embarrassed, scrambling to rewrite the story. They thought they had more time to maneuver, more time to manipulate, but you let them get close on purpose, not to entertain their presence, but to ensure that when you struck, the damage would be irreversible. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And now, every step they take echoes with the memory of the moment. You turn the entire game around without warning. And perhaps the greatest sting for them is knowing this: you were never in the dark. You had already seen the script. You had already heard heaven's warning. You were simply allowing them to walk into the light, because once light touches a snake, it can never hide again. That's the unshakable truth they'll have to live with, while you've already moved on to higher ground. Rise, chosen one. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And the fact that you can stand here without bitterness proves that victory is already sealed. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. And this victory isn't just for today, it's a declaration for every battle yet to come. They counted on your kindness to keep you quiet. They built their safety net on the belief that your gentleness would be your gag order, that your compassion would bind your tongue like a rope, a time to be silent and a time to speak. Ecclesiastes 3:7. For a season, you let them believe it. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. Told yourself, this isn't worth the storm. You carried secrets that weren't yours to carry. Not because you agreed with them, but because you didn't want to be the one to set off the fire alarm. But can a tree stand tall if its roots are wrapped around rot? You weren't protecting peace, you were protecting their image. Deep in your spirit, you knew it. Each time you silenced yourself for their comfort, it felt like a stone settling heavier on your chest, like a river dammed up by debris. Your silence was unnatural, and the pressure kept building. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Proverbs 31:8. And then came the moment when something holy in you refused to be contained any longer. They were hiding behind your goodness, using your silence like a forest uses its canopy to hide the shadows below. They believed you were too loyal, too loving, too Christian to ever speak up, but they miscalculated. Because you didn't just reach a breaking point, you reached a spiritual awakening. You realized God never called you to be a peacekeeper at the cost of truth. He called you to be a truth bearer, a torch that sets darkness fleeing. Isn't it true that covering evil with silence only makes you a silent accomplice? The revelation hit deep. Protecting wickedness in silence makes you part of it. And once you saw that clearly, you stopped bowing to false loyalty. You stopped shielding people who would never shield you. You traded the shallow calm of pretending for the deep stability of divine alignment. It was like a lion finally stepping out of the tall grass, no longer camouflaged, no longer crouched, but walking forward without fear. Nature has its witnesses to this. The alpine snow cornice, clinging silently to the mountain's edge all winter, holding back the avalanche for months. But when the weight of deceit piles too high, gravity speaks and the collapse is swift, unstoppable, and devastating to everything in its path. That's what your moment was. They thought they could keep piling on without consequence. But they forgot that pressure always finds its release. When you chose truth over comfort, obedience over image, justice over pretending, it shook them. They realized guilt could no longer control you. Fake love could no longer blind you. Their shadows could no longer hide under your shade, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. Ephesians 5:11. It wasn't vengeance that revealed them, it was light, calm, clear, unshakable light. And in that, you echoed the moment in A Man for All Seasons, 1966, when Sir Thomas More, facing false accusations, stood in court and said, "I die the King's faithful servant, but God's first." Isn't it powerful when truth is spoken so steadily that it shatters every lie without a single raised voice? The sun rose in you in the same way, steady, unstoppable, and bright enough to burn through every fog they tried to hide behind. They never expected you to speak, but you did. And it wasn't loud, it was righteous. That's what broke them, the quiet authority of a person who has nothing to prove, but everything to stand for. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. You didn't destroy their image. The truth did, and truth, once unleashed, never goes back into hiding. They tried to trigger a reaction, but you triggered their revelation instead. They poked at old wounds like engineers testing for structural weaknesses in a building, hoping to find a crack they could widen until the whole frame shook. They resurfaced long-buried memories, brought up sensitive topics, and laced conversations with passive aggression, so subtle that outsiders might mistake it for banter. Sometimes the attack was as soft as a sigh, other times as sharp as glass under bare feet. Sometimes it was subtle, like a faint vibration in the foundation, barely noticeable to others. But to you, it was a clear seismic warning. And yet, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Proverbs 14:29. Patience became your structural reinforcement, making you earthquake-proof to their tremors. Their goal was never just to sting you in the moment, it was to provoke you into becoming the villain in the script they had already written. One they had rehearsed, scene by scene in the shadows. They wanted a public meltdown, a shouted accusation, a slammed door, something they could capture and replay as proof of your instability. They needed a moment that could be weaponized, twisted, and performed before their audience. But can an architect design a collapse when the structure has already been reinforced with steel and stone? You had rebuilt yourself like a fortress on bedrock, earthquake-tested and storm-proofed, leaving no fault line for them to exploit. You felt the pressure, like a dam absorbing the relentless push of a swelling river that threatened to spill over. Yet instead of reacting, you stayed centered, as if you'd dropped anchor in the middle of the storm. You kept your breathing steady, your voice measured, your movements deliberate, and even your pauses spoke louder than their accusations. In psychological terms, you shifted from the amygdala's reactive fight-or-flight impulse to the prefrontal cortex's strategic command center. This wasn't suppression, this was precision. You became the chess player who refuses to rush their move, forcing the opponent to overplay their hand. You knew the exact outcome they were fishing for, and you refused to take the bait, no matter how shiny the lure appeared. What they didn't understand was that healing had unplugged your triggers. The old levers they once used to pull you into chaos no longer fit into who you've become. You had outgrown the machinery they built to control you. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. Psalm 118:14. They were expecting a spark. You responded with still water calm, deep, and impossible to stir without divine permission. Isn't it something how still water can reflect the entire sky in perfect detail, while a storm can only distort it? You had become a mirror of heaven's steadiness, not an echo of their noise. As your peace held, their tactics began to fray like a rope under too much strain. Their tone sharpened into desperation. Their carefully crafted narratives started contradicting themselves, tripping over the lies they had rehearsed. The mask they had worn perfectly polished for years began to slip at the seams, revealing the raw, unfiltered truth they tried to hide. What they planned as your exposure became their own undoing, fulfilling the words of Mark 4:22, "For whatever is hidden is meant to be disclosed." The more you stood unmoved, the more obvious their unraveling became, until even silent onlookers began to question the performance. Your peace became a mirror they couldn't bear to look into. Every calm glance from you was a reflection of the chaos they carried inside. This is where a real-life lesson comes in. Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian who helped Jews escape the Nazis, once said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." That's exactly what you did. You trusted God with the timing, the exposure, and the outcome, knowing that rushing to clear your name would only dim the truth. You didn't chase vindication. You allowed it to walk toward you on its own. Isn't it powerful when trusting God becomes the very shield that dismantles every scheme? It's a principle of physics too. Resonance can only amplify what's already vibrating. You refused to resonate with their chaos, so their noise remained trapped in their own frequency, bouncing back at them instead of spilling into your spirit. And when there was no echo from you, the silence became deafening, amplifying their missteps in ways words never could. It was like a stage without music, where the actors' false lines suddenly rang hollow. You didn't win by overpowering them. You won by becoming the still point around which their spinning world unraveled. You stood so firm that their own momentum carried them straight into the spotlight, the same one they had tried to force upon you. And isn't it poetic when the trap built for you becomes the stage for someone else's downfall, like Haman building the gallows in the Book of Esther, only to be hung upon it himself? You didn't just keep your composure. You became the living embodiment of Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still, without raising your voice, without a single counterattack. You rewrote the ending of their play. Now, they're standing center stage in the very spotlight. They once tried to make your place of shame, except this time, the audience isn't applauding them. They designed the setup. But heaven had already secured the ending. Every scene in their mind was choreographed with precision whispers, calculated to weaken you. Alliances formed in the shadows. Timing chosen to strike when you seemed most vulnerable. Like playwrights scripting a tragedy, they saw the final act as your public collapse. They envisioned the tears, the isolation, the hollow look in your eyes. That was the payoff they wanted. The scene they thought would seal your fate. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. Psalm 37:12-13. Yet they forgot that heaven's pen never runs out of ink, and no man can close a chapter God has not finished writing. They mapped it all, confident that control of the opening meant control of the conclusion. But in the middle of their performance, something happened they hadn't rehearsed. God stepped in, and when he intervenes, the script isn't just edited, it's rewritten in real time. Doors they swore were sealed shut and swung wide open with no human explanation. People they had convinced to stand against you started questioning their version of events. What they meant for destruction became the very furnace that refined you, stripping away the last traces of fear and hesitation. Can a weapon truly prosper when it's pointed at someone God has already anointed? Or will it always break in the hands that forged it? The transformation was undeniable. Instead of a breakdown, you experienced a breakthrough. Instead of shame, you walked into strength that could not be faked. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. You didn't just survive the blow, you rose higher than before. And your elevation became the lens through which their schemes were exposed. Their plan turned into their own mirror, reflecting the malice they tried so hard to conceal. And with each reflection, the truth became harder for them to bury, because the light they feared most was now coming from you. History carries echoes of this. During the reign of King Darius, jealous officials schemed to have Daniel thrown into the lion's den, Daniel 6. They saw his prayer life as a weakness to exploit, but God used the very trap they built as the stage for his glory. Daniel came out untouched, and his accusers faced the fate they had designed for him. In the same way, the snare laid for you became the evidence that revealed them. Isn't it striking how the enemy's most calculated move often becomes God's most public victory? And isn't it humbling to know that divine justice doesn't just defend, it reverses the entire outcome? Real-life wisdom also confirms this. Howard Schultz, the man who transformed Starbucks into a global brand, once said, "In life, you can't have everything, but you can have the things that really matter to you." You understood this in the spiritual sense. You didn't fight to salvage the image others had of you. You fought to keep the alignment God had given you. While they chased applause for their performance, you pursued a purpose that couldn't be staged. And that's why no amount of slander could touch the foundation you were standing on. That's why the shift was so swift. Divine justice doesn't always arrive with thunder and spectacle. Sometimes it appears as sudden peace, unexpected favor, or silent vindication that no one can block. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And in that stillness, you gained what no performance could counterfeit, credibility born from truth and anchored in heaven's approval. Those who once believed the rumors began to see with their own eyes. And that vision became your greatest vindication. After all, what louder testimony exists than the transformation your enemies swore would never happen? Now they are the ones bewildered, not only because you didn't fall, but because you rose without warning, as if gravity itself had no claim on you. And in that rising, you proved to everyone watching that when God is the author, even the cleverest liars can't control the narrative. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Proverbs 19:21. Rise, chosen one. Stand in the truth of this moment. The setup wasn't your end, it was your unveiling. The story they wrote for your ruin has already been replaced by the testimony God is writing for your rise. And the ink of his promise will never fade. You were never meant to fall. That was never God's design for you. Even though the setup was crafted to feel suffocating, personal, and intentional, heaven had a different assignment. The weight was real. The betrayal was sharp. And the silence from those you expected to stand with you was deafening. But God didn't position you there to be crushed. He placed you there to see. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord. Isaiah 43:10. You weren't stationed in the middle of the battlefield because you were fragile. You were placed there because you were spiritually armored to handle truths others would deny, avoid, or excuse. And doesn't it change everything when you realize your placement wasn't punishment but promotion? Suddenly, what felt like exile begins to feel like strategy. The enemy tried to write you into the script as a victim, but heaven had already cast you as a witness with authority. What they assumed would disorient you became the very process that refined your clarity. Each lie was like wind peeling leaves from a diseased tree, exposing the sickness beneath the surface. Each betrayal was like a low tide, revealing the jagged rocks that had always been there but hidden under calm water. And when the people who should have defended you stayed silent, it told you exactly who was truly aligned with you and who was merely along for the ride. Isn't it strange how storms clear the air in ways sunshine never could? Sometimes it takes the violence of a breaking wave to reveal the treasures buried beneath the sand, and sometimes it takes betrayal to expose the people who never had your back in the first place. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. Psalm 92:12. And you were being pruned for that flourishing, even if it didn't look like it at the time. You weren't just surviving this, you were studying it. You were tracing patterns like a tracker following footprints through untouched snow. Learning the hidden paths of deceit, you began to understand the unspoken agreements, the invisible currents that kept corruption shielded behind polished smiles and false unity. The prudent see danger and take refuge. Proverbs 27:12. You didn't just observe it, you internalized it, storing every detail in a vault that no lie could erase. And in that vault, every detail became a seed. And every seed was growing roots of wisdom. What's more dangerous to the enemy, someone who escapes the trap, or someone who escapes and understands how it works? You became the latter, and that made you untouchable. While they worked to manipulate your emotions, God was recalibrating your discernment. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started recognizing the divine assignment. You realized you weren't sent in as a casualty, you were sent in as a witness. Like an eagle stationed on a high cliff, you could see the entire battlefield from above, untouched by the confusion below. God permitted the betrayal, not to wound you, but to reveal how deep the roots of decay had gone. And isn't it sobering to realize He trusted you to face what others would have run from? This was no accident. This was divine architecture, a master blueprint where even the cracks in the wall had purpose. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. And you began to see that promise taking shape in real time. You were never meant to turn a blind eye. He knew you'd remember the details, the tone of the conversations, the hesitations, the sideways glances. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed. Luke 8:17. When the moment came, those memories wouldn't serve petty revenge, they would serve prophetic testimony. You didn't need to destroy reputations. You were sent to speak truth that no one could deny. The moment you realized that, your restraint became your weapon. Your silence was no longer the silence of fear, it was the silence of strategy. And when God finally gave the green light, every hidden thing began unraveling without you having to lift a hand. It's a moment not unlike the scene in Beckett, 1964, when Thomas Becket, facing betrayal and the threat of death, refused to recant the truth God had placed on his lips. His composure under fire became the very evidence of his divine conviction. Isn't it powerful when your calm truth-telling becomes the blade that cuts through a mountain of lies, like a river that carves canyons over centuries? Steady truth wears down even the most fortified deception, and like Beckett, you discovered that when you stand immovable, heaven itself becomes your defender. The enemy fears a believer who cannot be provoked into foolishness, because then the only one exposed is them. Now they avoid your presence not because you're bitter, but because you carry the whole picture. You remember who acted, who pretended, and who stayed silent. You don't need physical receipts, because you are the receipt. Your life, your healing, your freedom, these are living proof that the trap failed. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. Psalm 18:2. And every time they see you still standing, it is as if their own conscience is shouting at them, "You are not just a survivor of their plot, you are a walking contradiction to their narrative. Rise, chosen one." The fact that you still stand means the testimony is still unfolding, and no one can silence the truth God has authored through you. And isn't it something to know, the best part of your story hasn't even been told yet? You smiled through the setup, and that was the moment the architecture of their plan began to collapse. Every beam of deception, every scaffold of manipulation, every engineered distraction they had erected around you began to lose structural integrity the instant you refused to wear the fear they had scripted for you. It's a principle known in physics as resonance disruption, when an outside frequency destabilizes a system until it crumbles from the inside. Your peace became that frequency from the outside. It looked like you were walking straight into a finely calibrated trap. To them, the geometry was perfect. The lies in place like pressure points, the distractions spaced like load-bearing columns, the people they planted acting as human reinforcements. They waited for the collapse. They expected to see panic spread across your face like cracks in a crumbling wall. But instead, you smiled. What kind of power unnerves an enemy more than fear? That smile wasn't ignorance. It was an act of spiritual engineering. In psychological terms, it was cognitive reframing, the deliberate choice to see a battlefield as a place of victory before the war even ends. It rattled them because it didn't align with the cause and effect equation they'd built in their minds. You weren't supposed to carry that kind of poise. You were supposed to signal submission. Instead, you were broadcasting sovereignty. It was the same kind of unshakable stillness Daniel carried in the lion's den when no wound was found on him because he trusted in his God. Daniel 6:23. Your smile was a silent sermon. I see through all of this, and I know exactly how it ends. They had counted on fear to dissolve your resolve, but instead, your peace dissolved theirs. Isn't it strange how silence can echo louder than shouting? This is the same energy Nelson Mandela carried when, after decades in prison, he walked out smiling. Not because injustice hadn't wounded him, but because he understood that inner victory precedes outer liberation. Mandela once said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." That's the kind of unbreakable equation they didn't factor into their design. They had built their scheme like a chess game, anticipating your panic as their checkmate. But you were already playing a higher dimensional game, the kind where the board belongs to God, and every piece moves according to His will. Your composure became the mirror that reflected their own instability back at them, exposing cracks they didn't know were visible. What happens to a fortress when the foundation itself starts to betray it? In military strategy, there's a concept called the quiet before the counterstrike, the calm moment between battles when an army regroups not in retreat, but in calculation. That was your posture. You weren't flinching because you knew God had already destabilized their fortress from the inside. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17 wasn't just a verse you believed. It was a law of spiritual physics operating in real time. Your smile wasn't for them. It was for the victory already vibrating in your spirit, the kind of frequency that can't be muted, no matter how perfect the setup seemed. And when the moment came, their entire design unraveled like a faulty equation finally exposed to the truth. Now they're left in the debris of their own making, holding the blueprints of a plan that failed, asking themselves how the entire operation fell apart when they had measured every angle. But the truth is painfully simple. The foundation they built on was arrogance. And arrogance has never survived the weight of divine justice. You saw them, You saw the trap, and you smiled because you knew they were never the ones holding the power. And when the author of heaven's architecture decides the story isn't over, no human blueprint can determine the ending. You saw the energetic shift before the physical betrayal, like sensing the change in air pressure before a storm rolls in. You didn't need a text message, a whispered warning, or a sudden outburst to know something was wrong. Long before the betrayal took form in actions or words, you felt it in the atmosphere. Something was moving. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was quiet, unnervingly quiet. A pause that didn't feel natural. A tone dipped in a strange coldness. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. A silence that once felt safe now carried the weight of a locked door, without a single word being said. Your spirit recorded the shift like an architect, memorizing the fault lines of a structure before the earthquake hits. You could almost hear the creak in the beams of your connection, the subtle groan before collapse. How could they think you wouldn't notice a change this sharp? It's the same kind of perception that made the Apostle Paul warn the early church. For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. The exterior was still polished, the conversations still lively, the laughter still scripted to keep you comfortable, but underneath, something had cracked. That deep sense of unity you once shared had been severed, like a vine cut from its root, yet still green for a moment before it withers. You could feel the tension building in the unseen realm, like a wave swelling far offshore, carrying the betrayal toward you long before it could crash. It's strange, isn't it? How a heart can hide its shift in loyalty while the spirit shouts it from miles away. And as the frequency drifted further, you realized the betrayal didn't start in their words or actions. It started in their heart, in that secret room where they thought God himself wasn't watching. This is exactly why the late business magnate Steve Jobs once said, "Intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect." In my opinion, you weren't paranoid. You were tuned in to the wavelength where truth speaks before facts appear. They thought they could keep it buried until they were ready to act. They thought they could fake the love, fake the loyalty, fake the presence. But your spirit was too alert. You weren't scanning their facial expressions. You were reading the atmospheric shift, the unspoken withdrawal, the over-explaining, the sudden distancing that no friendly smile could hide. Isn't it incredible how the absence of something warmth, sincerity, connection can speak louder than any confession? And in that absence, the truth started painting itself in colors too bright to ignore. And there's always a villain in stories like this, someone who thinks their mask is flawless. History remembers figures like Benedict Arnold, who smiled in the company of those he planned to betray, believing he could time his move for maximum damage. Yet, like all deceivers, his own patterns gave him away. You caught yours in the same way, not by spying, but by discerning. And just like God warned Joseph in dreams to prepare for famine years before it came, Genesis 41-32, you were given your own internal alarm. That alarm didn't just warn you, it freed you. It shifted you from reaction mode to preparation mode. And when the moment finally came, you stood there, unshaken, because your spirit had already rehearsed the scene. How could their act ever surprise you when you'd already seen the ending? This wasn't just a gut feeling. This was a revelation. God's Spirit had already played the scene for you days, even weeks before the curtain lifted. That spiritual awareness gave you an invaluable advantage: time. Time to fortify your peace. Time to begin emotionally untangling yourself from something that had already begun turning against you. Time to let your heart process in advance what your eyes would later see. So when the mask finally dropped, you didn't shatter. You stepped aside and let it fall without touching you. They thought they caught you off guard. But the truth is, they were the ones walking into a trap, one they set for you, but built in such a way that it exposed them instead. They thought they had the element of surprise. But the betrayal had already played in your spirit long before it unfolded in real life. You didn't just feel it, you accepted it. And that acceptance became your armor. That's why it didn't destroy you. It simply confirmed what you already knew. When you walk in divine discernment, no hidden dagger can strike without heaven letting you see the shadow first. And that kind of foresight, it terrifies those who thought they could strike you in the dark, because now they know your eyes see further than theirs. Your spirit hears deeper than their whispers. And your peace is a fortress they will never breach again. They are burning with frustration, not because they simply failed, but because they failed at something they were certain would crush you. This was no impulsive attack, no messy burst of anger. It was crafted with precision, much like an architect studying the exact fault line in a building to bring it down with one strike. They observed, measured, and layered every piece as if they were composing a symphony meant to end in silence, your silence. They saw themselves as the master conductors. But Proverbs 21:30 reminds us, there is no wisdom, nor insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. And without knowing it, they were already playing a score God had rewritten. They dressed their trap in charm and false warmth, wrapping gossip in the language of concern. They believed the frost they spread through your circle would kill the roots of your influence before spring could arrive. Yet, just as a river in the highlands forces its way through winter ice at the first breath of sunlight, your resilience broke through their frozen intentions. Why did they not recognize that the soil of your spirit was nourished by something beyond their reach? Isaiah 41:10 declares, "Do not fear, for I am with you. I will strengthen you and help you." That strength was quietly at work, building you while they thought they were breaking you. In their minds, your fall was inevitable. They imagined it like the tragic climax of an opera, a slow unraveling that would leave the audience weeping. But what they witnessed instead mirrored the miraculous turn in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. For much of the play, the king loses everything: his family, his peace, his reputation due to lies and jealousy. The story seems locked into tragedy. Yet, in the final act, what was thought lost forever is restored in a breathtaking moment, as if time itself bends to mercy. That's what God did for you, just when they thought the curtain had closed on your life. Heaven unveiled an ending they never saw coming. Isn't it remarkable how God's scripts carry plot twists no human hand can write? Slowly, the intricate web they spun began to fray. Lies collapsed under their own weight, and the whispers they spread turned back to haunt them. It was like the unnatural stillness in a forest before a storm, a silence that warns, not soothes. People they manipulated began to sense the hollowness of their performance. Psalm 37:6 says, "He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun." That dawn was already breaking over you, and it was brighter than their shadows could contain. Now, their fury burns hotter because you did not merely survive, you emerged stronger. You did not shout to defend yourself. Yet your quiet presence speaks louder than their loudest accusations. They smile in public, but in private they wrestle with the knowledge that you know the truth. And here's the question they cannot escape. What does it do to the human soul to realize the person you tried to bury has become living proof of your failure? Romans 8:31 answers plainly, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" So here you stand, still favored, still advancing, still carrying the undeniable evidence of divine intervention. This is no longer about endurance alone. It's about becoming a living testimony that the trap became the stage. Will you rise not just for yourself, but for those still caught in the snare, who need to see that victory is possible? Rise, chosen one. Rise in the strength of the one who called you. Your story already holds the proof, and it is a story no human scheme can erase. This is the undeniable truth, and it will echo long after the dust of this battle settles. The trap they built has already collapsed under the unbearable weight of its own deception. They engineered it like master planners, sketching blueprints of betrayal in the dim corners of envy. They invested hours, whispers, and carefully choreographed moves into the hope that this moment would be your undoing. But in the end, the very structure they erected to destroy you became the stage on which heaven revealed its masterpiece. Like an ancient citadel, standing unmoved after centuries of siege, you remain, not because the stones of your life were never struck, but because they were set by the architect whose designs are eternal. Psalm 18, 2 declares, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge." And every step you've taken since this began has been proof that those words are not poetic sentiment, but living reality. They thought your history was a weak point, a crack in the wall they could exploit. But they misread your scars. Those scars were not signs of fragility. They were steel reinforcements, forged in the furnace of past trials, tempered by grace, and welded together by unshakable faith. Every loss you endured became a load-bearing column in the architecture of your resilience. Every tear you shed watered the foundations of your strength. They could not collapse you because they never built you. Heaven did, while they drafted the floor plan for your downfall. Heaven's design was already under construction. Imagine an artist painting over the graffiti of destruction with strokes of gold and light. That is what God did with their plot. The pressure they applied became the resonating chamber where your spirit found a new frequency. In the language of physics, it was the principle of resonance. The more they struck, the more you vibrated in alignment with heaven's tone. They thought they were silencing you, but in truth, they were tuning you. And like a tree planted by streams of living water, you did not wither under their drought. Your roots went deeper. Your leaves grew greener, even in the shadow of their schemes. You bore a fruit of patience, wisdom, and spiritual authority. They expected collapse. What they witnessed was photosynthesis of the soul, light transformed into life, right before their eyes. They wanted you silent, yet now your voice carries a gravity they cannot escape. They wanted you erased, yet now your very presence bends the atmosphere, drawing attention they cannot control. They wanted you shamed, yet your testimony has become a weapon of light, dismantling the shadows they once hid behind. And because you did not merely survive but transcended, your existence has become an uncomfortable mirror they cannot turn away from. Understand this: their anger now is not rooted in the failure of their plan alone, but in the revelation of who you truly are. They see it now: the authority, the anointing, the calling. And what unsettles them most is that you did not rise with vengeance in your eyes, but with peace in your step. You did not burn them down. You outgrew their reach. That is why the silence between you is so loud, why their smiles are thinner now, why their laughter dies quicker. This was never about revenge. It was about revelation. The setup was never truly designed to break you. It was a divine stage to expose them, not for your ego, but for the clearing of the atmosphere. Now the truth stands in the open, and they cannot unsee it. So rise, chosen one. Rise without hesitation, without apology. Let your very walk become a procession of victory. Let your stillness be the banner that waves over every battlefield you've conquered. The trial has become your testimony. The ashes have become your crown. The very air you breathe now carries the fragrance of freedom. The verdict has been written in heaven's court and sealed in the blood of the Lamb. You are victorious. This is not the end of your story. It is the prelude to your next chapter of glory. Walk forward with the calm, unshakable authority of one who knows the ending has already been written by the one who never loses. You are not just a survivor. You are the living proof that when heaven writes the script, no enemy can edit the final scene. Chosen ones, if you've stayed with me until this moment, you already understand what was designed to destroy you has been transformed into the very testimony that proves God's hand is on your life. Every trap was dismantled. Every lie lost its power. Every weapon failed because heaven had already declared your victory before the battle began. This isn't just a survival story. This is proof that when God is for you, no one can stand against you. If this message touched your spirit, show it by hitting the like button. It tells the world you're still standing. Share this video with someone who's walking through their own storm. And drop a comment below, declaring in faith, I am covered. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you never miss another word of truth, encouragement, and revelation that will keep you walking in purpose. To every single one of you, whether you've supported this channel through a super thanks or simply by watching, liking, commenting, and praying, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are more than viewers, you are family, and you are part of this divine mission. And as we close, I speak Numbers 6:24-26 over you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Walk in divine favor, unshakable peace, and unstoppable purpose. The best is not behind you, it's ahead. Stay covered, stay alert, and above all, stay chosen.